Joining me now is Uri Zaki. He is the founder of The Front. He's a fascinating guy. He was director of Zionist Enterprise at the World Zionist Organization. The Front is a very progressive group fighting back against right-wing politics in Israel. And there's so much more about him that I want to discuss. But Uri, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great being here.
All right. So Uri, I often talk on the show about how Netanyahu and some of the right-wing supporters of Israel here in America are not indicative of all of Israel, and I don't want people to get that misleading image. So tell us about the left wing in Israel. And I know that right now, obviously Netanyahu is in charge, but right now Trump is in charge in America. So what's the current state of the left wing in Israel?
Exactly. Well, to begin with, we have national elections in about 2 months, in April. In Israel, we have a multi-partisan system, unlike in the United States, where you have two parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. In Israel, we have about a dozen parties represented in our parliament. The left in Israel is not in its peak right now, I would say, undergoing 10 years of Netanyahu, and especially with his last 4 years coalition, which was probably the most extreme right-wing coalition we ever had. The left in Israel has been undergoing a massive defaming campaign run by Netanyahu and his coalition allies. It came to a point where most parties in Israel, Israel was founded by the socialist left, by the Labor Party, but now most parties would not call themselves left or progressive. My party, the Meretz Party, which I'm a member of, is probably the one of the only ones that would proudly call itself a leftist party. But having said all that, we have a very strong progressive community here in Israel. We have a strong civil society organizations which work for human rights, many human rights organizations, mostly challenging the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, the Palestinian territories, where you also have Israeli settlers, and the Israeli military is in control. You also have very advanced social justice organizations fighting for a better society. You have some, not like the Young Turks, but some progressive media in Israel. So we have a very vibrant progressive community. Again, fighting a very harsh, blunt, I would say neo-right coalition.
So you're an Israeli citizen, obviously you're in Israel right now, and so you were in the Israeli Defense Forces. You came out and started promoting peace and challenging the occupation. Why?
Honestly, Cenk, when I joined the military, and we have compulsory service in Israel, so basically almost all Israelis, men and women, start their 2 to 3 years service when they're 18. Throughout my childhood and high school, I was a right winger. I believed in what we call the Greater Israel, the biblical notion of what is the land of Israel, which is bigger than the state of Israel. The state of Israel is about 78% of biblical Israel. The other parts are under Israeli military control. So when I joined the military, I thought this is all ours. And when I actually served in the territories, I realized that there's a people there. There's the Palestinian people. And what I found to be very non-Jewish is the fact that we are controlling the Palestinians against their will through the might of our arms. And I thought that's, as a Zionist, meaning that as a person who believes that the Jewish people has the right of self-determination in the state of Israel, I felt this goes against the principle which founded the Zionist movement a combination of Jewish self-determination, but also of democracy. The Zionist movement was the second political movement after New Zealand at the beginning of the 20th century, for example, to grant voting rights for women. So when I went there, studied the checkpoints, understanding that this combination of the greater Israel and the occupation doesn't work. And in order to save our democracy, I need to fight against this situation of occupation, which I still, to this day, and maybe more so, because now we're after 52 years, mind you, when I served, this was more than 20 years ago, and we're still there. This is undermining Israel's character as the Jewish democratic homeland. The democratic notion is being undermined by our military control of the Palestinians, and ever since I've been trying to challenge this situation, to change it through tracks of peace. I was part of a bold attempt by former Israeli cabinet minister Yossi Beilin and former Palestinian cabinet minister Yasser Abed-Rabbo, which was called the Geneva Accord, trying to negotiate a model permanent status agreement to prove first to Israelis and Palestinians and to the world that we can reach an agreement that would be accepted by both peoples, and we did. But this is in 2003, and unfortunately, ever since, the official leadership didn't agree on a similar agreement, which I think is a necessity for both peoples to end this conflict, to compromise, and to maintain Israel as a democratic Jewish homeland, and to create a Palestinian state, which is their basic right.
Right. It reminds me a little bit of a Martin Luther King's quote about going to the South, not just to liberate African Americans, but to liberate the white people down there from the immorality that they were living in, from what had grown in their heart, which was not positive. And it also reminds me of Israeli leaders at the formation of Israel, or at the beginning of the occupation, I should say, who warned other Israelis, this will affect our character. And so it's not just about being decent to Palestinians, it's about who we are and who we'll grow to be. So I think that's the most interesting question and what I'm most concerned about. So Uri, what happened from that moment to this moment to make Israel now lean far more in the right-wing direction and have Netanyahu rule for so long? What were the forces at play that created that environment?
Honestly, from the point of view of I would say, regular Israelis, many times, and mind you, several Israeli leaders did try to go towards a direction of peace, and they were met with a very violent response by, I would say, the extremists from both peoples. The most well-known one is, of course, Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel between 92 and 95, who was assassinated by a Jewish assassin who tried to stop the Oslo Accord, this interim agreement, which was the first time where the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Israel attempted to reach an agreement between the two peoples that would finally end the conflict. Later on, Prime Minister Barak in 2000 went to a summit with the then leader of the PLO, Yasser Arafat. The summit was about trying to finalize a permanent status agreement. It failed, and very quickly the situation on the ground deteriorated into a what is called by the Palestinians the second intifada, the second uprising. But this was a very bloody one, where we had the first suicide bombers, or large-scale suicide bombers in the streets of Israel, killing many innocent Israelis, and a very strong retaliation by the Israeli military, killing many also non-involved Palestinians. And this was a very bloody time for both Israel and the Palestinians. And many Israelis kind of almost gave up on this notion that we can reach a compromise. And later on, Prime Minister Sharon unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip, meaning uprooted the Jewish settlements there and redeployed the Israeli military from within the Gaza Strip, which is on the southern western border of Israel, a small area with millions of Palestinians, which used to have some few thousands of Israeli settlements, withdrew there. And after the withdrawal, the more extremist Islamic Hamas movement took over there and started kind of a fight with Israel, also launching rockets towards Israeli communities and cities, and with Israel retaliating by bombing Gaza. So for some Israelis, because many times the extremists on the Palestinian side, and as I said before, also on the Israeli side, to many Israelis, they felt as if the equation is whenever we try to compromise, we get a violent retaliation. Of course, what I see is the enemies of peace are trying to fight peace by violence, and instead of understanding that, and it's tough to understand when people are dying, but that if we can prevent this retaliation, if we can, beat the extremists and reach an agreement that will save Israel and the Palestinians, we kind of linked together. We have to do it together. So far, the extremists won, and many Israelis grew more and more, I would say, unsecure about the prospects of having a peace deal, and voted for Netanyahu about 10 years ago, and ever since he stayed in power with this ticket of, I am Mr. Security. Whenever we tried to do some compromises, we got some attacks back. But unlike the feeling that Mr. Netanyahu is trying to portray as if the status quo is viable, the real situation is first that the occupation is penetrating the state of Israel itself. I mean, for how long can for 52 years, we're holding another people with a non-democratic regime, with a military regime, and the kind of tactics that are used there are penetrating the Israeli character or the Israeli democratic character. For instance, the Netanyahu government right now is actually attacking the democratic institutions in Israel, whether it is the judiciary, whether it is the free press, whether it is the civil society. Not to say that it's not a democracy. Israel is still a strong democracy, but you have growing attacks by the government on our democratic institutions. Right now, Netanyahu himself is facing some possible indictment for corruption. And in order to fight this, and I'm sure you'll find this familiar with the current American administration, he's bluntly attacking the Israeli law enforcement and the Israeli judiciary as if it's all a part of this lefty conspiracy against him, while he's actually indicted for things that are not connected at all to politics. The former Prime Minister Olmert served time in prison, and he was a prime minister who tried to go for peace, but he also faced corruption indictment and was found guilty and spent time in jail. So it's not like unique against a prime minister from the right.
That's right. Uri, just real quick, last thing here. Is there forces from America that have basically interfered with Israel, and what kind of a difference has that made?
Look, it's amazing how the right-wing movement in America and in Israel are intertwined, especially when money is concerned, but also consultants. Netanyahu is very well connected to the Republican apparatus. A lot of American money is invested here in a kind of, I would say, a test field for some of the tactics that were later used in the United States. whether it is organizations that are focused on attacking the Israeli civil society. We even saw, for instance, Bright was founded with an idea of Netanyahu. We saw Netanyahu, American consultants aiding the Hungarian prime minister with his attack against George Soros, for instance, with his campaign against George Soros. It's all a kind of a network with American donors and consultants, Israeli politicians, and it's all a very scary, I would say, network of acting together in order to fight democratic institutions in several countries.
All right, Uri Zaki, the founder of The Front, which is a progressive group looking to fight back. Everybody check that out. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it, Uri.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.